Welcome to my channel, The Good Book Tales. Tonight, I want to take you back more than 2,000 years, to a time when the world seemed quieter, yet every shadow carried whispers of destiny. The night air was cool, the desert sands still warm from the day's sun, and above, hanging in the deep velvet sky, was a star unlike any other. It burned brighter than the moon, refusing to fade, as though it carried a secret the whole world was meant to know. Far away, in lands separated by mountains, rivers, and kingdoms, three travelers gazed upward at that same star. They were not ordinary men. They were scholars, seekers, and watchers of the heavens, wise men who had spent years studying ancient scrolls and reading the silent language of the skies. For them, stars told stories. And this one was the beginning of the greatest story ever told. Each of them had left behind comfort and safety, wealthy homes, familiar streets, and families who could not understand why anyone would risk so much for a journey into the unknown. Yet their hearts were restless. They had read of an ancient prophecy, of a child to be born, a king unlike any the earth had ever seen. And this star, this mysterious light, was the sign they had been waiting for. Night after night, they traveled across deserts, through bustling marketplaces where the smell of spices and roasting bread filled the air, and over rugged hills where the wind howled like a warning. Along the way, strangers whispered rumors. Some said the star marked the rise of a new ruler. Others feared it foretold the fall of kings. Every mile they traveled seemed to draw them deeper into a mystery that felt both dangerous and holy. When they finally reached Jerusalem, the great city was alive with noise, merchants bargaining in the streets, pilgrims from distant lands, and guards patrolling the palace walls. But it was inside those palace walls that the wise men made a decision that would change the course of their journey. They asked a single question, simple in words, yet heavy with meaning. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. Those words carried farther than they expected. King Herod, seated in his marble hall, heard of their arrival. He was a ruler who did not share his throne easily, and the thought of a new king sent a chill through his veins. Behind his courteous smile, his mind was already plotting. The wise men, unaware of the storm their question had stirred, were invited into the palace. But as they stepped across the threshold, they could feel the air change, heavier, colder, as if the walls themselves were listening. Herod's eyes studied them carefully, his voice soft, almost too kind. He told them he too wished to find this child. What they didn't know was that every word, every smile, and every promise that followed would lead them closer not only to the newborn king, but also into the path of a deadly deception. And so, beneath the light of that unblinking star, the journey pressed on, toward a moment that would test their wisdom, their courage, and their very lives. The corridors of Herod's palace seemed to stretch forever, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast restless shadows on the walls. Servants moved silently, their eyes lowered, careful not to meet the gaze of the visitors. The wise men followed their guide deeper inside, each step echoing against the polished stone floors. The air smelled faintly of incense and something else, something they couldn't quite name, but it left a tightness in the chest. Herod greeted them with a practiced warmth, his hands spread wide as if welcoming old friends. Yet, beneath the gold rings and the embroidered robe, there was an edge in his eyes, a guarded curiosity. He asked about the star, how they had seen it, and what it meant. The wise men, eager to share their discovery, spoke of ancient writings, prophecies passed down for generations, that told of a ruler who would shepherd his people with justice and peace. They described the star's sudden appearance in the eastern sky, how it shone brighter each night, guiding them westward. As they spoke, Herod listened intently. nodding at the right moments. But inside, his mind was already racing. A new king meant a threat, a child who might grow to take his throne. His questions became more precise. When had the star first appeared? How far had they traveled? Where did they think the child could be found? His voice remained calm, but his fingers tapped lightly against the arm of his chair, a rhythm betraying his unease. The wise men noticed the tension, though they could not tell whether it came from fear, suspicion, or something far darker. They had encountered many rulers in their travels, some generous, others harsh, but there was something about Herod that felt unpredictable. Still, they could not turn back. The star's light was still out there, and their journey was not yet complete. Herod, after a pause, leaned forward and lowered his voice, as if sharing a personal secret. He told them the child they sought would be found in Bethlehem, a small town not far from Jerusalem. He urged them to go quickly, to search carefully, and then, most importantly, to return and tell him exactly where the child was, so he too could go and worship. The wise men exchanged glances. His request seemed reasonable, even respectful. Yet, somewhere deep inside, an unease began to stir. They could not explain it, but the thought of coming back to this palace after finding the child brought a shadow to their hearts. That night, as they rested in the city, the star shone faintly through the thin clouds above. Its light was steady, patient, as if waiting for them to take the next step. But neither they nor the city around them could sense the quiet storm already beginning to form. Outside the palace walls, Jerusalem buzzed with murmurs. Word of the wise men's arrival had spread quickly. Travelers from the east, speaking of a king foretold by the heavens. In the crowded markets, merchants exchanged glances, unsure whether to be excited or afraid. Some whispered that such a child could bring freedom. Others feared it might bring war. In a dim corner of the city, a young scribe copied the ancient prophecies onto a worn scroll. His candle flickered as he read the words again and again, feeling the weight of them press against his mind. The writing spoke of Bethlehem, of a ruler born to lead with strength and mercy. He wondered if the strangers from the east were right, if the star truly was a sign. Yet, in the same breath, he wondered what Herod might do if that ruler were found. Meanwhile, the wise men prepared for their journey to Bethlehem. They gathered their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, each chosen not only for their value, but for what they represented. Gold for a king, frankincense for worship, myrrh for a destiny no one yet fully understood. Their camels were loaded, their supplies checked, yet something in the air felt heavier than the night before. In the palace, Herod met in secret with his advisers. Their voices were low, their faces tense. They spoke of the prophecies and of the child's potential claim to the throne. Herod's eyes were sharp, his jaw set. His advisers knew better than to question his next steps. As the wise men left the city gates under the fading glow of dawn, the streets behind them seemed to hold their breath. The star waited ahead, its light steady, but shadows were already moving in places they could not see. The road to Bethlehem wound through quiet hills, the land bathed in silver by the star's unwavering glow. Each step forward seemed to pull the wise men deeper into a silence that was not empty, but expectant, like the world itself was holding back a breath. The wind carried faint sounds from distant shepherds watching their flocks, but otherwise the night belonged to the star and those who followed it. The wise men spoke little now. The closer they came to their destination, the more their hearts raced. Questions swirled in their minds. Would they truly find the child foretold by the ancient prophecies? And if they did, what would it mean for kingdoms, for rulers, for the very course of history? The gifts they carried suddenly felt heavier, not in weight, but in meaning. Behind them, far beyond the hills, Herod's men prepared quietly. Orders had been given, and those who received them understood the danger of failing. Torches were kept low, cloaks pulled tight against the night, as if secrecy itself could change fate. The last stretch to Bethlehem narrowed into a path between olive groves, their twisted branches reaching like dark fingers toward the road. The star now shone directly above a small cluster of homes, its light so bright it seemed to pour over the rooftops. The wise men slowed their pace, exchanging glances. Something in the air shifted, a stillness that was almost too perfect. They knew they were close, so close that the sound of their own breathing seemed loud against the quiet. Every instinct told them the journey was about to reach its most important moment. Yet somewhere unseen, threads of danger and destiny were tightening together, ready to pull taut. And once they did, nothing would remain the same. Just as the wise men prepared to take the final steps into Bethlehem, the quiet night was interrupted by the distant rhythm of hooves. At first, they thought it might be shepherds returning from the fields, but the sound was too quick, too deliberate. It was the kind of pace that carried urgency, and perhaps something more dangerous. They exchanged cautious glances, their hands instinctively resting on the satchels that held their gifts. The star still burned above them, guiding them forward, but the noise behind them grew clearer. A faint glimmer of torchlight appeared far back on the road, weaving through the dark like fireflies chasing the wind. Whoever it was, they were not trying to remain unseen anymore. The eldest of the wise men urged them onward, his voice low but firm. They could not turn back now, not with the journey almost complete. But even as they pressed forward, questions pressed harder in their minds. Was this the king's escort, sent to honor the child? Or was it something far less noble? Up ahead, the quiet village of Bethlehem lay still, unaware of the approach. Families slept in small homes clustered along narrow paths, the only light coming from windows where the last of the evening fires still glowed. The wise men moved quickly, blending into the shadows as best they could. Yet, the sound of the riders behind them seemed to grow louder with every step. In the distance, a shepherd appeared, leading a small flock toward the village. His eyes caught the strange light of the star, then shifted toward the approaching travelers. Something in his gaze held recognition, not of the men themselves, but of the purpose that had brought them here. He raised his staff slightly, as if signaling them to hurry. But just as they reached the edge of the first home, a sudden cry split the night, not from Bethlehem, but from the road they had left behind. The torchlight flared brighter, and a voice sharp and commanding cut through the air. The words were too far to make out, yet their tone carried urgency and command. The wise men hesitated for a heartbeat, torn between the pull of the star and the shadow of the threat closing in. Every choice now felt heavy with consequence, and the path ahead no longer seemed as simple as following the light. The moment of decision was coming, and it would not wait. The wise men quickened their pace, slipping into the narrow lanes of Bethlehem just as the riders reached the edge of the village. The star's light poured down like a beacon, guiding them to a modest home at the far end. Their hearts pounded, not from the journey now, but from the knowledge that they had finally arrived. Inside, a faint glow spilled from a small window. The door creaked open as they approached, and there stood a young mother, her eyes calm, yet filled with a depth they could not explain. Beside her, a man watched quietly, protective but welcoming, and in her arms was the child. The moment felt unlike anything they had imagined. The room was humble, the air warm with the scent of fresh straw, yet something greater than wealth or power filled the space. They fell to their knees without speaking, each placing their gifts before the child. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It was not ceremony, it was surrender. Outside, the riders' voices grew nearer. The sound of hooves scraped against stone, and the flicker of torches cast long shadows across the walls. The wise men exchanged glances. They could not let the child fall into Herod's hands. Then, in that stillness, a strange certainty came over them. It was as if the very star above was whispering what to do. They could not return to Jerusalem. They must leave by another road. Slipping quietly into the night, they took a hidden path out of Bethlehem. The riders never saw them go. But as they vanished into the darkness, the star above began to fade, its task complete. Yet the final twist came at dawn. Far from Bethlehem, the youngest of the wise men awoke from a dream so vivid it stole his breath. In it, he had seen Herod's true plan, orders that would send soldiers not just to find the child, but to sweep through Bethlehem with a merciless purpose. The dream left no doubt. Their journey was not only about finding the king, it was about ensuring his survival. They pressed on, hearts heavy but determined. The prophecy had begun, but the world around it was already shifting. And somewhere, in the quiet of Bethlehem, a young family prepared for a journey of their own. One that would take them far from home, under the shadow of both destiny and danger. The road away from Bethlehem was long and quiet, lined with hills that caught the first light of morning. The wise men rode in silence, each lost in thought. They had followed the star, found the child, and given their gifts, but they understood now that their role in this story was greater than they had imagined. They had been witnesses, yes, but also protectors, carrying the knowledge of what they had seen into a world that would not easily believe. Behind them, the village remained unaware of how close danger had come. The young mother, Joseph, and the child still rested in their small home, unaware that the dream given to the wise men would soon reach them too. Their own path would lead them into the safety of a distant land before Herod's shadow could fall. The wise men's journey back took them along quieter routes, far from the watchful eyes of the palace. Along the way, they shared with one another what they had felt in that small room in Bethlehem. A peace so deep it was as if the very air had been alive. They spoke of the prophecies in a new light, no longer as distant promises, but as truths unfolding before their eyes. In the villages they passed, people asked why they traveled without returning to Jerusalem. The wise men only smiled and said their work was done. They knew some would never understand, but that was the nature of such moments. They were meant for those called to witness them. When they finally parted ways, each took with him the memory of the child and the star. The gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh were gone, but the purpose they carried was not. They had seen the beginning of a story that would change the world, and that was a gift no distance or time could take away. And so their paths faded into the lands they called home, the star now only a memory against the vast sky. Yet in their hearts, they knew its light still burned, guiding not their feet now, but their lives. The journey had ended, but the story of the king they had found was only beginning, written not in the stars anymore, but in the hearts of all who would believe.